It was a warm afternoon when an elderly black woman walked into a busy restaurant, the kind of place where people came to relax and enjoy their meals. She was dressed neatly in a simple yet elegant outfit, carrying a gentle air about her. She looked around the room, her eyes soft but sharp, noticing the laughter and chatter of families, friends, and couples scattered across the room. The restaurant had a warm, inviting atmosphere, with the clinking of silverware and the sizzle of food from the kitchen filling the space. A young waiter, who was new to the job, spotted the elderly woman as she entered. He looked her over quickly, but his gaze lacked the warmth you would expect from someone who worked in a place that prided itself on hospitality. He didn't greet her with the smile you would think to receive as a guest. Instead, he looked at her with an indifferent expression. His eyes wandered over her before he reluctantly moved to approach her. The way he carried himself told the woman everything she needed to know. She had seen this look before. It wasn't the first time she'd been treated differently, but she had learned long ago to keep her composure. She had no time to waste, and she wasn't going to make a scene. She simply smiled politely, greeting him as she took her seat. "I'll just take a table for one, dear," she said in her calm, measured voice. She could feel the weight of his indifference in the air, but she wasn't one to let it bother her too much. After all, she had learned that some people, no matter how hard they tried, could never see beyond the surface. The waiter barely looked her in the eye as he handed her the menu, nodding stiffly. "Take a seat," he muttered before moving on to the next table without offering her a word of comfort or welcome. The woman glanced down at the menu in her hands, the words on the page blurring for a second. She wasn't upset, but the slight discomfort in her chest grew. She had dealt with people who judged her for how she looked or assumed things about her life before. She had seen enough in her lifetime to know that prejudice could hide behind a smile, and today it seemed to have disguised itself as a young waiter's apathy. As she waited, the atmosphere around her felt different. The hum of conversation around her seemed a little louder, a little more distant. She didn't want to make a fuss, so she waited patiently. A quiet, calm resolve filled her heart as she stared out the window, watching the world outside. She knew that some people couldn't help the way they thought about others. She didn't blame them, but she still wished they could see past the color of her skin, past the age she had earned, and treat her the same as anyone else who walked in through the door. The waiter returned a moment later, asking if she was ready to order. She simply smiled and nodded, keeping her voice soft as she gave him her order. She could tell by the look on his face that he wasn't interested in going the extra mile for her. His mind seemed already somewhere else, not thinking of the service he was supposed to provide, but merely going through the motions. Little did the waiter know, he had made a serious mistake in underestimating this woman. What he didn't realize was that she wasn't just any elderly woman sitting alone in a restaurant. She was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. The elderly woman sat calmly at her table, observing the hustle and bustle around her. Her patience was unwavering, but she couldn't ignore the discomfort growing inside her. The waiter had been polite enough, but there was something in his manner that didn't sit right with her. His coldness was not just a simple mistake. There was a distinct air of indifference. She understood that people sometimes had bad days, but the lack of kindness stung more than usual. Still, she remained composed, focusing on the surroundings rather than her own feelings. The menu in front of her was filled with various dishes, but she had come for a specific meal she had been craving for a while. She wasn't one to order complicated items, and today she just wanted something familiar, something that reminded her of better days. It was a small request, one that should have been easy for a restaurant like this to fulfill. When the waiter returned to her table, his approach was quick and brief, as if he was already planning to move on to the next task. She smiled and spoke clearly, asking if she could have her favorite dish. But when the waiter heard her request, his face seemed to harden. He didn't respond immediately, and there was a long, uncomfortable silence. The woman could feel the tension building. Finally, the waiter muttered in a dismissive tone, "That's not on the menu today." His words were blunt and unfeeling, with no attempt to offer alternatives or even make the conversation pleasant. The elderly woman raised an eyebrow slightly, but she didn't let her disappointment show. She knew it was important to stay calm. "Is it possible to check with the kitchen, dear? I would really appreciate it," she asked politely, her voice gentle but firm. The waiter's response was quick, almost irritated. "No, I'm sure we don't have it today," he said without even considering her request. He didn't apologize, nor did he seem to think there might be a misunderstanding. It wasn't about the dish anymore. It was about the lack of care and courtesy she was receiving. The woman's smile remained, though it was now tinged with a quiet sadness. She then asked for something else, a drink, perhaps a cup of tea, something to enjoy while she waited. The waiter's reply came almost immediately. "We're out of stock," he said, his voice lacking any sense of real effort to help. Once again, his coldness was apparent, and the woman began to feel the weight of it. The elderly woman knew it wasn't just about the drink or the meal. It was the way she was being treated, like her presence didn't matter. She had faced this many times in her life, but every time it still stung. She had learned to keep her dignity intact and not let it show. She wasn't going to argue with the waiter or create a scene. After all, she knew what truly mattered in this world, and it was not the food or the drink, but the way people treated each other. She leaned back in her chair, still composed, her eyes meeting the waiter's for just a moment before he quickly looked away. She had seen enough. The day would soon unfold in a way that would surprise them both. But for now, she waited in silence, knowing things were about to change. As the elderly woman quietly sat at her table, observing the activities around her, the door of the restaurant swung open, and a man walked in. His presence was unmistakable, commanding the attention of everyone in the room without even trying. He was tall, well-dressed in a sharp suit, and carried himself with an air of confidence that was hard to ignore. The kind of person who, when they entered a room, instantly became the focus. He had a calm and assertive demeanor, and his face seemed to have an easy charm about it. It was clear he was someone who was used to being noticed. The elderly woman glanced up from her menu, her eyes flicking over to him. She smiled faintly, recognizing her son as he stepped further into the restaurant. He was exactly how she remembered him. Strong and determined, yet kind and thoughtful. She had always admired his ability to walk into a room and make an impression, to hold people's attention. But it wasn't just his appearance or his stature that made him stand out. It was the kindness he radiated, the respect he showed to others, no matter their position or circumstance. He looked around briefly, scanning the room for a moment before spotting her sitting alone at her table. His face immediately softened into a genuine smile as he made his way toward her. The elderly woman felt her heart lighten a little as she saw her son approaching. She had not expected him today, but she was glad to see him. "Mom," he said warmly as he reached her table, "I didn't expect to find you here. Everything okay?" The elderly woman's smile widened, and she reached out to take his hand in hers. "Yes, everything's fine, dear. Just enjoying a little quiet time," she said in her calm, soothing voice. Her son bent down slightly to kiss her cheek, then took a seat beside her. He looked around the restaurant and noticed the usual buzz of activity, but something about the scene caught his attention. It wasn't the happy chatter or the clinking of dishes that usually filled the air. It was the quiet atmosphere at his mother's table, the way the other customers around her continued to chat and laugh, but she was sitting there, alone, a little distant from the rest of the energy in the room. He noticed the waiter, who had approached earlier to take her order, was standing off to the side, avoiding eye contact with his mother. Something didn't sit right with him. He turned his gaze back to his mother, who, as always, was calm and composed, but something in her expression told him that all was not as it seemed. "Did everything go okay with the service, Mom?" he asked gently, his voice soft but attentive. The elderly woman hesitated for a moment, a slight pause that was enough to make her son feel the tension. She didn't want to cause any trouble, but she couldn't deny the way she had been treated. She gave a small sigh and finally spoke. "Well, there were some issues with my order, dear, and—" The waiter wasn't exactly friendly. Her son's brow furrowed slightly, and he looked over at the young waiter standing nearby, still keeping his distance. He couldn't quite understand why his mother, someone who deserved nothing but the best, was treated this way. But he knew that sometimes people were more willing to overlook certain things when they didn't understand who they were dealing with. Without another word, the son stood up and approached the waiter. The atmosphere in the room shifted slightly as he made his way toward the young man, who hadn't yet realized the connection between him and the woman sitting at the table. The son's steps were measured, calm, but there was a growing sense of determination in his stride. The waiter, unaware of the storm that was about to hit, continued with his work, never once glancing up to recognize the figure who had just approached him. The son stood tall, his eyes fixed on the waiter, who was busy at another table, oblivious to the tension that was building in the air. As the son moved closer, he could feel the weight of the moment. He was not angry, but he was determined to understand what had just happened. The young waiter had treated his mother with such indifference, almost as if she didn't matter, and that was something he couldn't overlook. The son didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention. He approached the waiter, who still hadn't noticed him coming closer. The son gently cleared his throat, and the waiter turned, his eyes wide with surprise. The smile on the son's face was calm, but there was something in his expression that made the waiter hesitate. "Excuse me," the son began, his voice steady and polite. "I noticed my mother sitting alone. Can you tell me how she's been treated?" The waiter blinked in confusion for a moment. He looked back at the elderly woman sitting at her table, and then back at the son, clearly unsure of how to respond. He hadn't expected this question, and for a brief moment, he didn't understand the weight it carried. The son's eyes didn't waver, and the quiet tension in the air grew stronger. The waiter, trying to maintain his composure, shrugged slightly. "She didn't seem very cooperative," he muttered, unsure if he should explain further. "She asked for something that wasn't on the menu, and I told her it wasn't available." The son's brow furrowed. He had heard the story before, but there was something in the waiter's tone that struck him. It wasn't just about the food or the drink. It was about the way he spoke about his mother. The lack of respect in the waiter's voice wasn't something the son could ignore. "And did you offer her any other options?" the son asked calmly, but with a hint of disbelief. "Did you try to make her feel welcome?" The waiter shifted uneasily, his discomfort becoming more noticeable as he realized he was being questioned in front of other customers. He didn't want to seem like he was at fault, but there was no denying the coldness he had shown the woman. He was still trying to brush it off as a minor misunderstanding. "She didn't seem like the kind of customer who would want something special," the waiter said, his words trailing off as if he regretted them the moment they left his mouth. The son's gaze became sharper, more focused. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and then spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. "That woman you just served, she's my mother, and I own this restaurant." The waiter's face went pale. He had not expected those words. The shift in his expression was immediate. His eyes widened, and he stammered, trying to find the right words, but they didn't come. The son's calm tone held the weight of authority, but it was the quiet realization that struck the waiter the most. He had made a huge mistake, one he hadn't even realized until it was too late. The son didn't wait for an apology. He didn't need to hear the waiter's excuses. He only asked, "Do you understand now why we're having this conversation?" The waiter, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment. He had treated the elderly woman with the kind of indifference and judgment that no one, especially not someone's mother, should ever experience. And now, standing in front of her son, he understood the consequences of his actions. He had made a misstep that he couldn't take back. With that, the son turned away, his mother's presence on his mind. He knew the situation wasn't about punishment. It was about making sure respect was always shown. no matter who walked through the door. The son turned away from the waiter, his mind already racing with thoughts of how to handle the situation. He knew the incident wasn't just about bad service. It was about respect. It was about ensuring that no one, no matter who they were, should feel the sting of being treated less than anyone else. As he made his way back to the table where his mother sat, the weight of what had just unfolded lingered in the air. He could see her sitting there, her posture as dignified as ever, her hands folded in front of her. She hadn't said much, but he could tell that she had noticed the way the waiter had acted. She hadn't raised a fuss, never once tried to draw attention to the poor treatment she had received. Instead, she had handled it with the grace and patience she had always shown, even in the face of unfairness. He admired her strength, and he knew she was waiting for him to take care of things, to handle it the way she knew he would. As he approached her table, he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Mom, I'm sorry about that," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the situation. "I know that wasn't right. You deserve better than that." She met his gaze with a calm smile of her own, her eyes filled with understanding. She had been through so much in her life, and yet there was never a hint of bitterness in her. She had seen people's prejudices before, but she had learned to carry herself with dignity, never allowing others' opinions to define her. "It's not your fault, dear," she said gently, her voice smooth and steady. "But I appreciate you standing up for me." Her words touched him more than he expected. He could feel the weight of her life's experiences in those simple words. She had taught him, time and time again, the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. But it wasn't just about what she had taught him. It was about who she was. She wasn't just a mother to him. She was a woman who had endured, a woman who had never let the world's unfairness break her spirit. The son looked back at the waiter, who was now standing at a distance, clearly uncomfortable. The manager had arrived by then, and the son could see that the waiter was now trying to explain himself, though his words were shaky. The son knew this wasn't a moment for anger. It was a moment for understanding, for ensuring that this kind of behavior would not be allowed to happen again. He nodded toward the manager, signaling that he wanted to speak with him. The manager, who had been watching from the sidelines, immediately moved toward him. The son spoke calmly but firmly, making it clear that what had just occurred was unacceptable. "No one, not even my mother, should ever be treated that way in this restaurant," he said, his tone unwavering. "If we want to maintain any sense of respect here, that kind of behavior has to be addressed immediately." The manager nodded quickly, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. He turned to the waiter, calling him over to have a private conversation. The son didn't need to hear the details. He knew the apology would come soon enough, but it wasn't about the apology anymore. It was about ensuring the lesson was learned. As the manager spoke to the waiter, the son returned to his seat beside his mother. He didn't say much, but there was a shared understanding between them. The situation had been handled. It wasn't about making the waiter feel small or punishing him. It was about teaching him, and everyone else in the restaurant, that respect should never be compromised. His mother had always been his example, showing him how to carry oneself with grace, no matter the circumstance. The son sat in silence for a moment, his gaze softening as he looked at his mother. She smiled back at him, the warmth in her eyes a reminder of everything he had learned from her. The waiter's mistake had been a wake-up call, but the lesson was bigger than just one incident. It was about creating a space where respect and kindness were the foundation of every interaction. As the manager spoke with the waiter in hushed tones, the atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to shift. The air that had once been filled with casual chatter and the clatter of plates now felt thick with anticipation. The elderly woman sat quietly at her table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, and her son beside her, his gaze never leaving the scene unfolding before them. There was no need for words between them. They both knew what had just happened and what had to follow. The manager approached the elderly woman first, his steps quick but respectful. He stopped just a few feet from her, his eyes meeting hers. "Ma'am, I want to sincerely apologize for what occurred today," he said, his voice filled with genuine regret. "We pride ourselves on providing excellent service to all of our customers, and it is unacceptable that you were treated this way." The woman looked up at him, her face still calm but her eyes showing a quiet understanding. She had seen this before, people making amends when they realized the error of their ways. She nodded slowly, not with anger, but with the kind of patience that came from years of experiencing the world's unfairness. "I understand," she said softly, her voice carrying a certain warmth that seemed to calm the room. "I appreciate you coming to speak with me. It means more than you know." The manager nodded, visibly relieved that the elderly woman wasn't holding a grudge. He had feared that this moment would be more difficult, but her grace was apparent, even in the face of disappointment. "I will make sure this situation is addressed with the staff immediately," he assured her. "You have my word that this will never happen again." With that, the manager turned to the waiter, who was standing off to the side, looking both nervous and ashamed. The waiter, his face flushed with embarrassment, hesitated before walking up to the table. He looked down at the elderly woman for a moment, struggling to find the right words to apologize. He had never expected that his actions would lead to this much attention, nor did he realize how much impact they could have on someone else. "I'm so sorry," the waiter said, his voice faltering slightly. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I didn't mean to upset you. I didn't realize. I just didn't see." The elderly woman raised a hand gently to stop him. "It's all right," she said, her voice calm and forgiving. "I know it wasn't intentional, but we must all learn to be better, to treat everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from." The waiter, now visibly relieved by her understanding, nodded quickly. "I will make sure I never make the same mistake again," he promised. "Thank you for being patient with me." The son, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, felt a sense of pride in his mother's ability to remain calm and composed throughout the ordeal. Her ability to forgive, to allow the waiter a chance to learn from his mistake, was something he admired deeply. It was a lesson in patience and empathy that he had always tried to live by. He turned to her, offering a soft smile, but she simply gave him a gentle look in return, a look that conveyed everything they both knew. This wasn't about the waiter or even the restaurant. It was about making sure people treated each other with dignity, no matter the circumstances. The manager, having handled the situation as best he could, nodded in acknowledgement of the woman's forgiveness. "Thank you for your understanding," he said before walking away to return to his duties. The restaurant, slowly returning to its normal rhythm, now had a renewed sense of respect hanging in the air. The elderly woman and her son continued to sit at the table, their conversation now shifting to lighter topics. But there was a quiet sense of satisfaction between them, knowing that this moment, as uncomfortable as it had been, had led to something better, a lesson in respect, a chance for someone to grow, and a reminder that kindness always holds more power than anger. The restaurant had slowly begun to return to normal, the gentle hum of conversation filling the air once more. The son and his mother remained seated at their table, their quiet conversation blending in with the background noise, but there was an unmistakable feeling of closure in the air. The tension that had hung over them moments before had dissipated, replaced by a sense of understanding. The elderly woman, still composed and graceful, continued to smile softly at her son. She wasn't one to hold grudges, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, knowing that through her son's intervention, a lesson had been learned, not just by the waiter, but by everyone in the restaurant. The son, in turn, was proud of his mother's ability to maintain her dignity throughout it all. She had shown him once again how to handle even the most uncomfortable situations with poise and compassion. He looked across the table at her, his voice low but filled with gratitude. "Mom, you're something else," he said, his smile widening. "You've always known how to handle things. I don't know how you do it, but you always seem to find a way to keep your head up, no matter what." The elderly woman chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "It's not always easy, dear," she said, her voice as gentle as ever. But sometimes, we have to choose how we respond. We can't control what others do, but we can control how we react to it. Her son nodded thoughtfully. He had always admired that about her. Her ability to rise above any situation, no matter how challenging. It wasn't something that came easily to him, but over the years, he had learned from her. And today, watching her handle the situation with such grace, he was reminded once again of the strength she had instilled in him. As they sat together, enjoying their quiet meal, the son's mind wandered back to the earlier conversation with the waiter. The lesson he had hoped to impart wasn't just about a single mistake. It was about something far greater: respect. It was about understanding that everyone, no matter their background, their age, or their appearance, deserved to be treated with kindness and dignity. He realized that the real power wasn't in calling out the waiter's mistake, but in offering him a chance to learn to grow. The son wasn't interested in punishing anyone. What mattered was teaching others the value of empathy. The restaurant, the waiter, and even the manager had all learned something important that day, and it was a lesson that would stay with them long after the incident was over. The elderly woman, sensing her son's reflection, placed a hand on his. "You did well, dear," she said, her voice full of pride. "It's not always about fighting back, but about helping others see the value of treating people with respect. You're doing just that." The son smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment in his mother's words. He knew that this wasn't just a lesson for the waiter or the restaurant. It was a lesson for everyone, including himself. He had been raised with the understanding that kindness and respect were the cornerstones of any relationship, and today had reaffirmed that belief. As they finished their meal, the atmosphere in the restaurant felt lighter, as though the ripple of kindness had touched everyone present. The waiter, though still visibly embarrassed, was moving around the room with more care now, paying attention to the details he had overlooked before. He was learning, slowly but surely, that respect wasn't just about politeness. It was about truly valuing people for who they were, not what they appeared to be. The elderly woman and her son exchanged a final knowing glance before standing to leave. The son paid the bill, and as they walked out the door together, he couldn't help but feel proud of the way the situation had unfolded. His mother's strength had been the anchor in the storm, and now they'd both left the restaurant with their heads held high, knowing that they had made a difference, however small it might seem. In that moment, they both understood that true change didn't come from confrontation. It came from the simple act of showing others how to treat each other with dignity. And that was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. As the door of the restaurant closed behind them, the son and his mother stepped out into the soft light of the evening. The street was calm, the sounds of traffic and city life fading as they walked together. There was a sense of quiet satisfaction between them, a feeling of completion that came from knowing they had done something important. It wasn't about making a scene or seeking revenge. It was about standing up for what was right in a way that reflected the values they both held dear: respect, kindness, and understanding. The elderly woman, her steps slow but steady, glanced over at her son with a proud smile. She didn't need to say much. Her presence alone conveyed everything. She had seen so much in her life, and she knew that sometimes standing up for yourself didn't mean confrontation. It meant leading by example. She had done that today, and so had her son. They walked in silence for a while, simply enjoying the quiet of the evening and the shared sense of peace that came from resolving a difficult situation with grace. The son could feel the weight of his mother's wisdom in every step, and he knew that this moment would stay with him. It was another lesson in patience, in empathy, in the quiet power of dignity. As they neared their car, the son glanced at his mother, still amazed at how easily she handled the situation. "You know, Mom," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I think you've taught me more about dealing with people than I ever realized. It's not always about confronting others. Sometimes it's about showing them a better way, just like you did today." She smiled, a gentle but knowing smile, as though she had always known he would come to understand. "It's true, dear," she said softly. We can't change how others act, but we can always choose how we respond. Sometimes, the simplest things, like being patient and kind, are the most powerful tools we have. Her son nodded, feeling the warmth spread through him. It wasn't just about the waiter, or even about the restaurant. It was about life. It was about learning to treat others the way you would want to be treated, no matter who they were or where they came from. He felt proud to carry that lesson forward, to embody it in his own life, and to pass it on to those he would meet. As they reached the car, the son opened the door for his mother, helping her into the seat before he slid into the driver's side. He started the engine, and they began the short drive home, the conversation shifting to lighter topics as they talked about the day's events. But there was a quiet understanding between them that spoke volumes. They had both learned something new, something valuable. And the journey they had taken together today was just another chapter in the long story of their relationship, one built on love, mutual respect, and the simple yet profound idea that how you treat others says everything about who you are. When they arrived home, the son helped his mother out of the car, and together, they walked toward the door. The evening was peaceful, and despite the events that had unfolded earlier, there was a sense of calm in the air. They had made a difference, not just for themselves, but for the world around them. The waiter would remember this day, and so would the manager. They would remember that kindness and respect could go a long way, and that the smallest actions could have the most significant impact. As they stepped into their home, the son gave his mother a final smile, one filled with gratitude. "Thanks, Mom," he said simply, his voice full of affection. "I couldn't have asked for a better teacher." The elderly woman looked at him, her eyes soft but full of love. "You've always known the right way to do things, dear. I just reminded you of what you already knew." And with that, they closed the door behind them, knowing that their actions today had made the world a little bit better, one small lesson at a time.